By the time the first rays of sunlight reached the front porch, the moving truck had already disappeared around the corner. I stood in the quiet living room, surrounded by unfamiliar silence that somehow felt more peaceful than the shouting matches we'd had for months. At exactly 8:11 a.m., the doorbell camera sent a notification to my phone. I tapped the screen and watched my wife, Vanessa, walk up the driveway wearing the same black dress she had worn to the charity gala the night before. One high heel dangled from her fingers, and her makeup was smudged by a long night she clearly hadn't expected to explain. She smiled confidently as she slid her key into the front door. It wouldn't turn. She tried again. Then a third time. Confusion replaced confidence. Seconds later, my phone buzzed with a text. "Ryan, I think the lock is broken. Can you open the door?" I set my coffee on the kitchen counter before replying. "The lock isn't broken." 3 dots appeared on my screen, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her message arrived. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, I looked back at the security camera. Vanessa was checking her purse, convinced she had grabbed the wrong key. She hadn't. 12 hours earlier, we had arrived at the charity gala together. She looked stunning in a midnight blue gown, and several people complimented us as we walked into the ballroom. For the first hour, everything felt normal. We laughed with friends, greeted clients, and even talked about taking a vacation together later that summer. Then a man named Eric walked through the entrance. The moment Vanessa saw him, her entire expression changed. She hugged him tightly, laughed at something he whispered, and for the rest of the evening, I felt less like her husband and more like someone who had accidentally wandered into someone else's story. I tried not to overreact. Eric had worked with Vanessa years earlier, and I told myself there was nothing wrong with old friends catching up. I spent the next 30 minutes talking with clients while keeping one eye on the dance floor. Every time I looked over, they were still together. They laughed at private jokes, disappeared to the patio for long conversations, and returned looking even more comfortable around each other. Eventually I walked over and quietly asked Vanessa if she was ready to head home. She barely looked at me before saying, "You can leave if you're tired. I'll catch a ride later." I stared at her, convinced I had misheard. "With who?" I asked. She smiled as though the answer should have been obvious. "Eric offered to drive me." She turned back toward him before I could say another word. In that moment, I realized I wasn't part of her plans anymore. I didn't argue in the middle of the ballroom. I simply picked up my jacket, wished a few friends good night, and walked toward the exit. Just before reaching the doors, I glanced back one final time. Vanessa was already walking out with Eric, laughing as he held the door open for her. Neither of them noticed me leaving. During the drive home, I kept replaying the evening in my mind, hoping I had misunderstood something. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Vanessa. "Don't wait up. I'm crashing at my friend Lisa's place. See you in the morning." Red heart. I read it twice before quietly setting the phone on the passenger seat. 20 minutes later, my doorbell camera sent a motion alert. It showed Eric's car stopping outside Lisa's apartment building for less than 10 seconds before driving away. Lisa never came outside. That single video answered every question I still wanted to believe had innocent explanations. I didn't spend the night calling or sending angry messages. Instead, I sat at the dining room table until sunrise, thinking about every conversation Vanessa and I had shared over the previous year. There had been promises about honesty, respect, and never making each other question where we stood. Somewhere along the way, those promises had quietly disappeared. At 7 o'clock, I called a locksmith and asked him to replace every exterior lock on the house. After that, I contacted my attorney to begin preparing the paperwork I had hoped I would never need. Vanessa's belongings were packed carefully into labeled boxes and moved into a secure storage unit that I prepaid for 6 months. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was thrown away. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was accepting the choice she had already made the moment she walked away from our marriage and expected me to simply wait for her return. When I finally opened the front door that morning, Vanessa looked relieved for a split second. Then she noticed the empty hallway. The family photographs were gone. Her favorite reading chair had disappeared from the living room, and the wedding portrait that once hung above the fireplace had been replaced by a simple landscape painting. She looked back at me, confused. "Where's my stuff?" she asked quietly. I handed her an envelope containing the storage unit information, a key, and a letter from my attorney. Her hands began to shake before she even opened it. Ryan, please tell me this is some kind of joke. I met her eyes and answered calmly. No. A joke is something both people laugh about. Last night, I was the only one standing alone while my wife left with another man. She lowered her head, finally understanding that my silence had never meant acceptance. Vanessa sat down on the front steps, tears streaming down her face as she tried to explain. She insisted that she and Eric had talked for hours about his recent divorce and that she had made the terrible decision to stay out all night because she didn't want him driving alone after drinking. Nothing happened between us, she said repeatedly. I believe she was telling me what she thought was the most important fact. But the truth I couldn't ignore was different. This isn't only about whether you slept with him, I replied. It's about choosing another man's company over your marriage after I asked you to come home with me. She covered her face with her hands. I never thought you'd actually leave. Those words hurt more than anything else she'd said that morning. They revealed she hadn't believed my boundaries were real. She had assumed I would always be there, no matter what she chose. 9 months later, the divorce was final, and the hardest days were behind both of us. Vanessa eventually wrote me a letter accepting responsibility, not for one evening, but for slowly treating our marriage as something that would survive without effort or mutual respect. I appreciated the honesty, even though it came too late to change the outcome. Friends often asked whether changing the locks had been an act of revenge. I always answered the same way. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition. The marriage had effectively ended the moment she expected me to wait at home while she built memories with someone else. The new lock simply reflected a decision that had already been made by our actions. Looking back, I don't remember that night because my wife walked away with another man. I remember it because it was the first time I chose to protect my own peace instead of endlessly hoping someone else would.